Controlling air pollution from transportation fuels is really challenging for a government. Keep in mind that everybody's car is different. Everybody's car is away from inspection. Once you buy it, you get to do all sorts of stuff with it, and you're going to probably do different stuff with it in Texas than you would in Alaska, than you would in Florida. And the cars behave differently under different settings with different stuff. I mean, that's a really complex regulatory landscape. So I want to talk about how we control transportation fuels, and I want you to imagine how complex that must be. First, uh, the government can set requirements to the manufacturer. You're not allowed to sell a car in the United States unless you can prove to the EPA that your car does certain things. Um, if you're ever bored and you're into cars, you should look into how Volkswagen cheated the US government with diesel emissions measurements. Um, they programmed their computer to give one type of performance when the cars were working for a government test, and then a different type of performance when the consumer was driving it. They got busted. People found the evidence. Resale value of the cars was diminished, and so Volkswagen set up this system where they bought the cars back from owners or gave them extra money when they sold the car. Anyway, really amazing. You should look into that. You can imagine getting all the manufacturers to do the same type of test so that you can measure the car's performance is not easy. Another thing that we regulate in the US is refineries. We set standards for what is in fuels. So you're not allowed to sell gasoline unless it has a certain amount of cleanliness. It's been filtered, so to speak. And it's a fascinating detail in the United States that we've set separate cleanliness standards for our gasoline than we did for our diesel. We wanted clean gasoline because we figured that around town nobody wants a whole bunch of nasty exhaust. But we set really low standards for diesel because we had to keep that fuel cheap. We're a huge country. So we have to keep the price of food production down because we know it's going to need a lot of distribution, and that distribution has to be cheap. So we made diesel cheap on purpose. Globally, diesel is much cleaner than ours because of refinery standards, what we demand of the people who make the fuel. But the thing I need you to know about, and what the College Board will want more detail on, is what we do at the individual level. Um, every car has to be smog checked unless it was made before 1972. I had an old 1972 Chevy C20 pickup, and I never had to smog it because it was super simple and super old. They're like, well, we don't regulate the emissions. It was a very dirty car. Those are dangerous. We're waiting for them all to die so that we can replace all the old cars. Um, so smog checks look for a few different things. I also want to remind you that in your future, there will be a lot more attention to public transportation and how we design our cities so that individuals don't need to drive as much. Um, in our past, there really hasn't been. If you look around the world, cities were designed really carefully to minimize transportation. Here in the United States, we didn't mind. Our urban landscape was built at a time when our economy was booming, 50s and 60s. And energy was really, really cheap. So we just thought, whatever, man, everybody will own a cool car and they won't mind driving because they only work 40 hours a week and they live in these beautiful suburbs. So for most people, we intentionally designed America to require long commutes. Um, that idea is very outdated and very dangerous. That's why we've made so much carbon emissions. So in your generation, there will be a lot of attention to how to minimize transportation use individual transportation use, and how to design our cities so that people don't have to drive as much. Anyway, but smog checks. There's a lot of chemistry that happens inside of that vehicle. When you open the hood, you see a whole bunch of molded parts and tubes and wires and little whatchamajiggies. And it's kind of fascinating to note that most of those things are emissions control technology. There's like a few basic parts, brakes and the little squirty water for the windshield and some electronics to run the lighting. But then, the large majority of all that mechanical complexity is just to maintain this really delicate balance chemically. Listen carefully, it's probably worth noting that the goal of a car is to burn just the right mix of gasoline and oxygen to minimize the hazardous emissions of the vehicle. So there's a whole bunch of things that you do to adjust the timing and the flow rates to get what's called complete combustion. That removes toxic carbon monoxide and it lowers oxidant ingredients. Then there's this other thing that modern cars have, which is very expensive. Old cars didn't have to do this. New cars do. And it's a heavy box full of really expensive metals. They have a whole bunch of like platinum and other stuff that you've probably never heard of, palladium and rhodium. Platinum is really expensive, rubber teeth. Platinum is like a very expensive metal. So the catalytic converter on my Tacoma is worth almost $2,000. And back in the 80s, during the crack era, people used to steal car stereos to get some money to fuel addiction. Now, during the meth and opioid era, people steal catalytic converters. And if you can find a neighborhood with a bunch of high-end cars, like big SUVs, family cars, and big trucks that has dark streets, that's a prime target to go steal catalytic converters. All you need is a cordless Sawzall, and you go zing, zing, and just cut the thing off the bottom, a couple of screwdrivers to get it dismounted, throw that in a backpack, and you've got $1,000 at the scrapyard. That's a lot of money. So this has been a crime spree in San Roque. I don't know how many of you live in San Roque, but you've probably heard, if not experienced, people with big trucks and SUVs having catalytic converters stolen. This technology was a big downer for the car manufacturers because it made the cars way more expensive, way heavier, and by the way, less efficient. It's a constriction in the exhaust, which means you're losing horsepower. But catalytic converters do this really neat magic. Catalytic converters do parallel redox. It's reactions that take oxygen from some things and stick it to other things at the same time. So they're interwoven chemical reactions. You have to know expensive metal. You have to know complicated chemical reactions or parallel redox reactions. And you have to know that hazardous emissions are chemically reacted on the way out to make less hazardous ones. And I'll need you to write these down. The carbon monoxide, the NOx, and the VOCs, that's what hydrocarbons are, that we're worried about, do chemical reactions at the same time when they interact with this metal. So that's what a catalyst is. It starts a reaction. Catalytic converter has a catalyst that makes reactions. And what comes out is water, nitrogen gas, and CO2, less hazardous stuff. You'll probably notice that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, but at least it's not carbon monoxide, which is deadly. And this is one of the ways that, probably the primary way, that cities control photochemical smog. This is the primary way that we have. forcing every car to have these things. But I'll bet if you look around the high school, you can find a kid that has cut this off their car to make it faster. It's really common. It also makes the car louder. And yeah, it makes the car deadlier. Yeah. Okay. That's it about cars. I'll come back with another video soon.